Hello and welcome to the start of a very special series of programs that GNAT-TV and other community access stations across the Vermont Access Network will be partnering on with the Vermont Council on Rural Development and the Barre Montpelier Times Argus and Rutland Herald newspapers. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director of GNAT-TV's news project, and it's my pleasure to welcome a very special panel of guests to our virtual studio for the first of what will be a 10-part series on ideas for the future of Vermont. What are some of the big questions that is facing the state as we emerge out of the pandemic and into whatever lies ahead? What are some of the critical elements that we need to build into the next chapter of Vermont's history? The topics that we'll be discussing over the course of the next 10 weeks will include areas such as education, childcare, business development, climate change, civic engagement, and several others. We're going to start our series today with a discussion about one area that received almost universal consensus that it's essential for the growth of the state: broadband access to modern high-speed internet service. The first of the 10 propositions we'll be discussing is Vermont must ensure universal broadband and cellular access while using digital tools to promote community, civility, democracy, and to advance local commerce and economic opportunity. With us today to discuss that proposition are Paul Costello, who's the Executive Director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development. Many of you are already familiar with the work of the Rural Development Council through their community visits that they've conducted over the past years. And since 1996, the council has done, I believe, about 76 of those community visits, usually working in 2 communities each year. We're also very pleased to have on our panel today Holly Groshner, who is the chairwoman of the Board of Equal Access to Broadband and formerly the General Counsel for the Vermont Telecom Authority and the former CEO of Vermont Public Television. We're also pleased to have with us today Mark Wood Lewis, who is the co-founder and CEO of Front Porch Forum, a well-known online gathering place whose mission is to help neighbors connect and build community through hosting regional networks of online neighborhood forums where folks can get recommendations or post news about local events. Michael, Holly, Paul, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. A great subject we have to discuss today, and let's get right into it. Paul, since this series of discussions and on these 10 propositions were generated by you and the Council on Rural Development, let's have you get us started here today. Broadband has been discussed at great length for quite a while now, particularly in the past year since the COVID pandemic has upended everything. And but before the pandemic, it was also a hot topic. I think it's fair to say. Legislation had been passed enabling communication union districts to be formed, and we can all think back to the administration of Governor Jim Douglas back in 2007. He talked about making Vermont an e-state, and we had stimulus money come in following the Great Recession in 2009, 2010. A lot of that got spent on broadband. So with that background, what do you feel the pandemic has taught us about the need for universal broadband?
Well, thank you, Andrew. The proposition that we have here really comes not from me and not from our organization so much as the thousands of conversations we've had. In the pandemic, we led community response work in different communities throughout the state. We also facilitated countywide meetings where we interviewed about 1,200 people. And we asked them, what does recovery look like? What's the next stage of work for the future of Vermont? And everywhere we went, we heard that ubiquitous and affordable broadband was an essential need for the future, that it's not just a luxury for those who can afford it, it's an essential infrastructure for every home and business in the state. When you think about COVID and what it showed us as a society, it showed us how essential telehealth was, where people weren't able to go to the doctors. They were being consulted through the internet, and people at the end of a dirt road without broadband could be left out. And that could be some of Vermont's vulnerable seniors and others. We saw our kids sent home from school and children left out of the internet opportunity had much more difficulty connecting to their teachers, to their homework, to be able to stay at pace with other students in schools. And so the contribution to the opportunity gap for those students is fundamental and very problematic. And then you think about all the offices that shut down and people working from home without broadband. How do you participate in that? And those are sort of some of the challenges that COVID presented. But the other side is that communities at the end of the dirt road or towns on the periphery of Vermont without broadband service, the next generation of people who are grown up broadband, digital natives, find it really hard to go back to a community without broadband. And if you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, you want to be an enterprise person, you want to connect to global marketing, global sales, you want to develop a modern business in whatever sphere, you need to have high speed. And so some of our towns are systemically sort of blocked from achieving their potential for participating in the global economy and for people to come and move there. So some of the demographic challenges and loss of youth that Vermont face probably stem from the lack of broadband and the opportunities that come with it. But when we look at this proposition issue and we gathered and listened to literally thousands of people around these issues, one of the things that we heard consistently was some of the challenge where broadband, the pipe to the house alone, is not enough for Vermont to have as a strategic vision for the future. In fact, sometimes broadband can extract economic resources from communities. If we purchase everything on Amazon.com and through other major international corporate presences, what does that do for our local bookstore, for our local hardware store, for the businesses in our downtowns? How do we use broadband instead to boost local sales, to be able to connect to businesses within your community, to expedite relationships, to know what businesses are offering, to celebrate your downtown and boost the local economy? How do we help cycle dollars locally for to boost economic development community to community? And on the other side, we know some of the tensions that come with social networking as the primary vehicle for news gathering and for the way we work and interact psychologically with the internet. But there are a lot of stories out there, like the documentary The Social Dilemma, that show how we're being, we fall into groups of mutual interest online, and our interests and our opinions are reinforced by others and by likes. And sometimes the social dilemma describes how Facebook actually manipulates logarithms to support you and make you interested and keep you in an emotional pitch actually online, so that you're spending more time in front of their ads, which is the bottom line for the business model. And often that leads us into bubbles of mutual interest that are almost set up to be antagonist. And so how do we use the internet to break out of these, out of our own circle and learn and interact with other people more effectively? And do that as part of a national dialogue, but also as part of how we work as communities. How do we engage and positively work together? And this is fundamental when you look at the challenge to democracy that's happened in our country, where we have divisions within our communities, but we also have a national division where there are people who rejected a national election. We think that Vermont needs to look at the very big picture of the digital tool, but also the applications that help us purchase locally and the applications that help us work together as communities.
Okay, Holly, I'll go to you next. And then Michael, you wrote your column in the Rutland Herald and the Times Argus touched on some very interesting points around this question. I thought anyone who hasn't read it yet ought to. But I'll let you go from there, Holly, and ask you what do you think the implications of the pandemic have for broadband here in Vermont?
Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate that. In this time, we have to take a step back and imagine what this all would have been like if we not had broadband service of any kind. The isolation, the separation, and the lack of credible information would have been catastrophic, to say the least. And so we're moving forward, trying to do better. And what we've seen from this pandemic is how rural communities can become ever more effective, how they can be more inclusive, how we can build opportunity together. I know I'm coming to you from the little tiny town of Corinth, Vermont. Actually, I live in greater metropolitan Cookeville, inside Corinth. And here in Cookeville, our town select board had meetings weekly of healthcare providers, of fast squad providers, of teachers, everyone joining in to say, where's the need? Where's the help that's necessary? Who needs what? And that kind of connection just wouldn't have been possible without some form of internet. Now let's talk about broadband. When we're talking about need and we combine it with technology, we get adapters and we get them quickly. And so when we have viable broadband, then we can start truly connecting through things like Zoom. I actually don't know anybody in my town who hasn't in some way interfaced with these meeting platforms like Zoom and Teams. And this has allowed families to stay connected. It has allowed democracy to progress. Meetings that would have been closed to others are still open. Government is open for business because people have adapted, and they adapted quickly. But we need the basic platform. We need the resources and, frankly, the skills in order to make that work. And I guess I'd also say that this pandemic has only been an introduction to the need for information and connection that we should acknowledge is going to be necessary going forward. It isn't like this is the last crisis we're going to witness as a society. And so we really need to take this opportunity to say, how are we going to do it even better? How are we going to be more resilient? And what are the resources we need to ensure that everyone has so we can stay inclusive, so that we can stay informed and connected? I think the message is pretty clear. This was the dress rehearsal.
Mm. And Michael, your thoughts on the subject?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I have to agree with what I've heard from both Paul and Holly. I'll just say, in my view, the pandemic has laid bare our dependence on the internet and the massive problems associated with our current configuration. Problems of equity, of surveillance, of sowing division. And the dependence piece, we need it. We need it in the way we need roads and sewer and water. I mean, we can't go back. So if that wasn't obvious before the pandemic, I feel like the pandemic, really lit up those two facts for all of us.
I was just thinking, Michael, Front Porch Forum, I guess you could say, couldn't even have existed without broadband. You're an online operation. If there's more and better broadband coverage around the state that comes as a result of some of the federal dollars that are being put into that, would that enable you to change your business model in some way or expand what you do? Or would you basically anticipate more or less continuing on pretty much as before?
Well, Andrew, actually, Front Porch Forum predates broadband. We started in 2000. We formed a business in 2006. Our current platform launched in 2011. And at every stage, we designed for, frankly, dial-up. For anybody who can download a simple plain text email, they can participate and get much of the value of their local Front Porch Forum. And that continues to be one of our values that is front and center in everything that we develop. Now, that said, of course, with better infrastructure and more adoption of broadband, we expect more people to have easier access to online life, including Front Porch Forum and everything else. It's one thing to participate when it's painful. It's another thing to participate when it's as easy as turning on a faucet. So, yeah, we're looking forward to more ubiquitous, angling towards ubiquity of broadband access and affordability across the state, because we'll be able to offer our basic service to more and more people, which is free and community-centric, and we'll be able to offer an increasing menu of features.
One of the main points that's been discussed over the past year or so, I think, around the broadband question is how it's made the viability of remote working more viable. And I guess I was wondering, I'd like to hear what each of you think about that. It's been discussed a lot, I think, as a way that we might reverse the demographic changes in Vermont. And Paul, you spoke to that a moment ago. We might bring new life to some of the more rural towns where younger folks have been leaving to go to better paying jobs in larger towns or cities. But what is your sense of that? Is broadband the magic bullet to kind of make those changes that we would think of as desirable to bring more people to live in Vermont and help sort of bring more vitality to smaller communities? Is that the main thing we need to do, or is it just one among several things?
I don't think it's the magic bullet. I don't think there's one thing. I think it's an essential infrastructure of the future for everyone. So I think that it's like the highway, but you also need to look at the sectors of the economy that have opportunities because of broadband, the small tech development center, the people who work in San Francisco and are developing games or managing stock portfolios, or they're participating in a design group with people in Mumbai, India, or in China. The international economy is often today doesn't care where you are. And you can intersect in cutting edge development work, and our kids can be studying Chinese with Chinese students. Frankly, we have incredible opportunities with broadband coming, but we also have opportunities for food systems, for us to better connect, to manage community supported agricultural enterprises, for us to decide what we want in our basket next month from our farmer, for us to be able to pre-order and order from the grocery store before we go there. The kinds of things that can make life easier and also boost local businesses, we're exploring, but it's a rich opportunity for community renewal. So it's not the only solution, but it's a piece of the work that's necessary. That's why it's part one of the proposition statement that we've been talking about, because we do want people to move to Vermont who are internet savvy and are connected to the global economy and can live anywhere. We also need workforce, and we need diversity. And so there's more to it than just attracting internet entrepreneurs, but they're definitely part of an essential part of Vermont's future.
I would agree with Paul, but I might put the emphasis on this as not the silver bullet, but pretty darn close. Because on both ends of the economic spectrum, if you want to create a vibrant economy, this is the roadway for goods and services. And I happen to have kids in California right now, and they are looking to move to Vermont. And the first question, of course, is how will I need gig service, Mom. How will I get my files back and forth to my employer in San Francisco? And this is real. This is how our younger generation will live. But there's a really important point here. We can't add broadband and lose community, because it's actually the quality of life in Vermont that makes everyone want to come here, not whether or not we have broadband. It's community plus. And so we really need to ensure that as we enhance our technology and our capacity for technology, that we do stay a vibrant community. It's no, Facebook is no substitute for town meeting. I'm just saying. The other thing about this is that to become more efficient and effective as a state, we're pushing more and more of our services to the internet. And so if you're a family in need and you need help, what is the first thing you need? You need internet access in order to apply. So both ends of our economy really need this as a primary, and it's a primary driver. It may not be a silver bullet, but it is a primary driver.
And Michael, what is your sense on the remote work side and the economic implications of it all?
Andrew, it's a new phrase we see on Front Porch Forum postings of people saying, hello, I'm introducing myself. I'm new to town. I'm a COVID refugee and I've moved to Vermont. And, where's the best creamy? Or, how do I find a plumber? Or, how do I handle DMV? Is it all online, or do I go in person to get my license changed over? All those kind of things. So we're certainly witnessing a lot of that from that perspective. I want to also, though, mention as an employer, Front Porch Forum now has about a couple dozen employees spread across the state. And we are 100% remote now, as so many are. And we recently did a survey of our staff, and a third have very strong broadband and they're fine. And they can do everything we need them to do for their work. A third are kind of in the middle, and they get by and it's okay. Not great, but okay. And a third struggle. And to have a third of my, my staff that I work with always being a question mark about, can you share your screen on this planning session, or will your internet support that or not? Can you get on and work a 4-hour shift at this time of day, or does your local access depend on, what your neighbors are doing? These are real challenges, and our business is facing them as I would imagine, pretty much all employers.
Can I comment on that, Andrew?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I admire about Michael and the work of Front Porch Forum is the way they build fiber in a community, that kind of this interstitial connection between neighbor to neighbor. And it's not to take the place of in-person, but it's to add to it. And especially with newcomers, people who don't know their neighbors, I've connected to people through it. But I also have been a fan because I saw what happened after Hurricane Irene, where we looked at what was going on in Moortown, where Front Porch Forum became the vehicle to coordinate volunteers. It became the place where people were lending each other a sump pump to get the water out of their basement, or a chainsaw to get a tree off the house. Or people were saying to people they didn't know, come on up, we've got an extra bed, you're welcome to stay at our house. And those kinds of things lead to friendships that last forever. An astounding thing that I saw soon after that I see sort of regularly now, was young mothers asking if there was anyone who had breast milk in the community. And other mothers saying, oh yes, of course I do, let's meet. And to me, that's an astounding thing, that we can meet people for things like that through the internet. And it's because people trust the media. They trust that the staff of Front Porch Forum are moderating and that this is a positive civil conversation. And it's just remarkable the kinds of connections that happen with it. How do we look at the future of the internet to support that kind of positive energy and that kind of positive community connection, rather than the sometimes hysterical division that can happen within Facebook, where people only see people who agree with them, or are confronted by people who are seen as enemies from the start of a dialogue. So I just think it's extremely rich as a model that can typify some of what we need to do, and some of what we need to do as we think about the potential for local commerce with similar tools.
Do all three of you think that there's a danger that we sort of retreat into our digital silos and we lose that sense of community? Once we do, we would have more modern levels of broadband service available, or is that, is the inherent culture of the state so strong that that will remain and we'll be able to reap the benefits of it? Or do you think there is a danger there somewhere?
So Andrew, I'll jump in here. That horse is out of the barn. Whether you are using a cell phone, your computer, whether you're talking to your sister-in-law who is on some particular website or a follower of some particular news commentary, it isn't that the internet or the technology has deleterious effects. It's about content, and it's about trusted networks that provide trusted content. And we used to talk about this in public media all the time. There is a really important need for there to be an ethical system of content monitoring. I think Front Porch Forum does a good job. I think there are other networks of information that do a lot to ensure the integrity of the information. And journalism as a whole, it has to be both supported and monitored to ensure that we are really putting our trust where it belongs. But that also comes with some education, right? Because we need to understand. Paul talked about the algorithms that are applied by some sites, and we need to understand how that works. So I wouldn't say that, oh no, here comes the broadband, we're going to be in trouble. That's not it. If anything, it allows more of us to be connected. When I think about Michael's employees who don't have great broadband and how it impacts their work, I'm immediately transported to the carloads of people who are gathered around hotspots at our town hall or the general store, spending the day trying to stay connected or be connected, or their kids sharing one cell phone in a car trying to be connected to do their schoolwork. These are unfairnesses that separate whole groups of people from the conversation, and that kind of isolation, it destroys diversity in the conversation. It destroys democracy.
Is the educational component of bigger and better broadband in Vermont really, really, really important, or is that just a side benefit? Or what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's essential. I think that if some children have internet and are able to participate in online culture, online investigation, self-directed learning, participation, with follow-up from school, doing homework online and so forth, and others don't have that capacity, how are we producing an equal educational opportunity for all our children? And, that's just fundamental to what we stand for as a democratic society. So democracy is not a given in world history. It's something that you protect, you nurture, and you educate for. So the next stage of our citizenry require opportunities to learn and think, and the digital media is going to be a fundamental tool to that. So I don't see any way around it. I think we're going to come out of COVID. We're not going to be driving 50 miles for a 1-hour meeting and then driving home anymore. We're going to be meeting online much more effectively. There's efficiencies in it. Our kids are going to have opportunities that we didn't have because of it, but they still need to play. They still need to be surrounded by other children. Wouldn't it be great if our children could participate in a Spanish lesson with children in Nicaragua or somewhere else in the world, and get a cultural immersion in the life and spirit of another place? So the richness of opportunity is incredible, and it's just beginning to be tapped. The potential for person-to-person connection online, like we're doing here in a Zoom media, how far is that going to go in the next 10 years? And how essential is that for people to be able to participate in with some equality? I just think it's fundamental. And, I'm optimistic that with the Federal Recovery Act, with congressional delegation from Vermont leading, with the governor and his administration standing for this, the legislature investing potentially $150 million in broadband rollout, the creative work that Holly and all the folks engaged in the communication union districts, the electric companies getting engaged because they've got to get fiber to every home to manage a distributed generation grid where everyone's producing energy and consuming energy, or everyone has the opportunity to play in that sphere. It's like this unique moment in history where a lot of these things are going to come together, but we have to have the intentionality with it to ensure that we're boosting our local communities, boosting our public engagement and dialogue with each other, in much the way that Front Porch Forum encourages today.
To build on what Paul has said, I agree. Vermont needs equitable and sufficient access to the internet for everyone here, certainly including families and school-age kids. And that means broadband, that means hardware, devices, that means training, and that means help getting hooked up. Sometimes the paperwork is too much to figure out, and hooking up a router for cable versus DSL versus fiber. So there's a lot of work to do there. I would add, though, crucially, I think we also need education around what all this means, and at the same level as this country was built with a layer of civic education, what it means to be part of a democracy, and media literacy. Everybody, our school-age kids and beyond, need to understand what these devices are in our hand, what the services are behind them, how the software is designed. Because, while we weren't paying attention, the people who are now controlling all of this designed them to be addictive, designed them to be extractive of wealth from communities, and they're hugely successful. So, yes, to equitable and sufficient access, but also yes to getting all of us better informed on what the real score is, so we can use these in safe ways.
I'd like to add to what Michael says, because he's really triggering an important area of conversation that we have not had enough dialogue around. And it starts not only with the general population understanding the nature of these tools, but I'll go right to Paul's enthusiasm for the support that we've seen for broadband in terms of federal dollars. That's awesome. But it's not awesome if it gets turned into the same old, if we don't have an understanding of putting people first and not private interest first. One of the things that happens a lot of times when you're putting public dollars into what has been private enterprise, and I've seen this as general counsel of the Telecom Authority in Vermont, is that private industry's competitive behavior is reinforced with public dollars. And if we're going to put public money behind broadband deployment, we need transparency. We need to put people first. The service, it has to be a focus on the individual consumers in Vermont, not in growing particular networks or how to be, the powerhouse provider. Now, Vermont's done an amazing thing. It has adopted a framework called Communications Union Districts, CUDs, and these are public citizen groups, most of them volunteers, who have gathered together and said, we really need to do something about broadband in our neighborhood. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because commercial interests, acting rationally as commercial interests do, have said, we really can't bring service to these areas, not and pay our shareholders, not and pay our employees what they've been paid, and not in having the kind of return that we expect to have on a system. And so I think we really need to listen to these CUD citizen groups and have them help us direct service into those communities. And we have to, if we're going to put public money behind it, say, okay, put your competitive behavior behind you. You're doing this work for the community.
What do you think the role of the CUDs are? We now have $150 million about to be appropriated by the legislature for broadband development. And, it's always seemed in the past to me that one of the big roadblocks to running fiber up the dirt roads halfway up the mountain to the last mile has been a money question. It simply wasn't profitable for an internet service provider to do that work. Now we have this federal money available, apparently. Looks like it's going to go a very long way towards solving that. So I found myself wondering, well, if that's the case, what is the role the CUDs still have to play in unfolding better internet service to underserved areas?
Yeah, back in the 30s when they began to roll out electricity, they built territories that you would cover as a co-op. And part of your responsibility was to cover the entire territory so that your most rural deployment was subsidized in some ways by the places where you made the most money, the dense places where you had a lot of customers together. That the broadband industry is unregulated as opposed to the electric industries in Vermont. So we haven't had the same kind of universal service provision. Lacking that, if you're not making money at the end of the dirt road, it's just not in your interest to drive there. So how do we look at public-private partnership? To me, in my, unexpert way, the Communication Union District is a structure for democracy. They are creatures of the towns. They're enabled by state statute, but the towns establish these in partnership to drive broadband where it isn't going based on the interests of private corporations. They are structured in such a way that they can act as nonprofits, they can receive grants, they can bond. And in this current setting with significant state and federal money in partnership that can lever dollars into regions, they can be a vehicle that work with private providers, work with electric companies, work with all the forces for good to identify places that require investment and build patterns towards that investment that require universal service in that particular territory. They also have the capacity to blend funds and think about what does a deal look like that's going to get it done? Do we need to bond for some of this? And what part could be paid for out of federal money or state money? And is there more money that we need to raise from philanthropy or others? We want to want to, celebrate the fact that the Vermont Community Foundation and other philanthropy, along with the state, has seeded dollars into CUDs for a reason, because they may not be the one and only thing, but they're an instrumental aspect of what can help drive us towards the completion of universal broadband service in Vermont. Another
thought that occurred to me, we've mentioned community engagement and the importance of local civic democracy. I found myself wondering what we might want to retain from this pandemic experience as we go forward into the near future when it comes to things like select board meetings and town meetings and that sort of thing. I mean, one of the things that's been fascinating to me is I can now tune into, well, several select board meetings every night if I wanted to, if my wife doesn't think I'm completely losing my mind. But it's been interesting to see how, in a way that's expanded transparency, it's expanded access to what various local governments are doing. And I will find myself thinking it'd be a shame to lose that because there's going to be obviously a big rush to get back to in-person select board meetings, and then all of a sudden the whole need to have a Zoom connection or a computer monitor playing in the background where someone in their living room can ask a question maybe doesn't seem as important. Do you think there's a future for that sort of hybrid political engagement when we finally get back to normal, quote unquote? And Michael, let me start with you on that one.
Sure. I have trouble imagining losing steps forward. I have trouble imagining we'll go back and take away things that people have found effective. There may be a little of that, but a little backsliding. But I imagine it's going to be more about how do we adjust to incorporate digital options in addition to real world and real life options. Someone shared with me near the beginning of the pandemic, the person had a disability, worked for a major employer, and he'd been asking for accommodations for the disability for years and been told, no, can't do that. Oh, too hard, that's impossible. It doesn't work with our policy, doesn't work with our tech, et cetera, et cetera. But the pandemic, within like 5 days, these changes that were impossible suddenly were universal throughout this massive international corporation. And they figured it out. And there's lots of examples like that. So what I see, the way I'm framing this more in my mind is not so much what will we keep and what's going to come back, but we're in a new chapter. This is, when the first automobiles showed up, it wasn't like, oh, I wonder how they'll work with the horses. I mean, that's probably how people thought, but flash forward 10 years and it's automobile dominant and horses, it's just the question gets turned on its head. So it'll be interesting. I'm keeping an open mind and looking at not the tools, not on the particulars, but more about who's benefiting, our primary goals being addressed, goals like inclusion and participation and democratic outcomes, things like that.
Well, I happen to be married to the chair of the select board. And so I can tell you for a fact that participation is up at select board meetings due to COVID-19. Thank you very much. And it would be a shame to lose that, but not just for convenience sake, but rather for the reasons that Michael is pointing out, is that we don't think of inclusivity in a broad way sometimes. Inclusivity includes people who can't afford broadband, by the way. Inclusivity includes people who can't get in a car. Inclusivity includes people who need to find a way to participate from whatever they're doing someplace else. And so this is a new opportunity for volunteerism. It's a new opportunity for inclusion. And I think it is the new world, and hats off to Michael for seeing it that way. We're going to have a new kind of Vermont going forward.
We're probably still in a little bit a crucible around our democracy, around issues of racial justice, around the digital technologies and their impact on our lives. This has all happened at once, and COVID has built a fire under it. And out of that fire, we have a question, a choice, I think, as a people. Like, do we stand up and lead the way for the future, or are we just impacted by the media and impacted by negative cycles in the dialogue? Do we step forward and learn and listen to each other as a people more effectively and participate more actively as citizens, both within our communities, in our state and nationally? Do we advance a vision of renewal and recovery that includes everyone in Vermont? And the digital tools, I agree with both Holly and Michael, they're not going away. It's amazing to me that in the last year, we've gone from holding only in-person meetings, really, looking to go to Barre to help people work together and expecting to bring 300 or 400 people together in person. And the next day realizing that's over and we're in the middle of COVID recovery. And suddenly we're in Zoom with people from 190 towns all across the state who are trying to figure out how they help deliver meals, how they build masks, how they work together. So the power of neighborliness and of our ideals and of our best sense of community, all those things, we want to ratchet those up in the internet, not have them crushed by a media that drives us into our corners. And likewise around the economy, we don't want to be driven into a global economy that removes our opportunities and creativity. We want to create right here, and we want to sell into that global economy, but we also want to cycle our dollars locally to strengthen local communities. So I'm a bit of a record here, but I think that the opportunity to do this right is tremendous, and I don't think we're going to get another chance to do it as much to build a strong future. This is an age of reform, and let's look at the digital tools available. Let's take advantage of them. Let's use them, but let's not be dominated by them or driven by them. Let's manage them to build the best possible future for us as a state.
I'd just like to tag on to something Paul's getting at here. In trying to go to the last mile with broadband, there's been a lot of conversation about gap filling with easy solutions or fast solutions. And just because this is one-time money, it should not be a quick fix. We should be really thoughtful about how we do this, because we don't know that we're ever going to get this kind of opportunity again. And it's more than that. Once we have a sort of a fix, the chances of having everybody's focus and attention drawn to this need again is pretty slim. And so my thought here is really to ensure that we don't send all the money out of state, that we don't plant all the money in low orbit satellites, that we recognize that we have a patchwork quilt of service, and we need to raise the standard of service in that patchwork and find out how we can have locally grown, locally run, very Vermont style communication that's world class. That's my thought.
What do you all think is the time frame to get this done by? Is this something that's like urgent in capital letters? We need to have pretty modern standards of broadband in place by next year or the year after, or do we have a 5 or 10 year window to get this done?
I would think in terms of months.
Really? Wow. Okay. Holly?
having lived through it in the Vermont Telecom Authority, I think you better strap in for years. And I know that it's urgent, but I think fast solutions are not long lasting. So I think we have to look at some near-term solution. You know, the federal money, some of it is channeled through something called E-rate, which supports libraries and schools. And libraries and schools are being given the authority in the new money to help individual households come online. Now, they might not serve them with a kind of connectivity that's going to last for years, or build a system, but that could be a short-term solution while we're building out a longer-term solution. But then again, I love cake and eat it too solutions.
So the proposition on the table comes from this conversation with more than 1,000 Vermonters, where we've been asking them what's necessary for Vermont to be successful over the next generation. What do we need to do to be successful by 2050 within the next 3 years? And so I'm right between Michael and Holly. I think we need to drive a concerted public-private partnership to fulfill the goal of universal broadband, that this is the moment to do it. We need to work together across government, across all the forces for good that surround this as an issue right now, and drive towards the last mile solutions, as well as looking at these longer term issues. These other issues on engagement and on the way it works to benefit the economy for everyone, they're going to be with us perpetually. But let's take a shot at doing what's within our power and our time on those issues at the same time.
Are there any lessons to be learned from our last experience when there were a certain amount of federal money available in Vermont? As I mentioned towards the start here, in the 2009-2010 period, we had stimulus money come to the state. A lot of it was intended to be spent on broadband and internet build out. My sense of that experience is that the results were somewhat mixed. Do you think there's any, like I said, lessons to be learned from that experience that should guide our thinking about how we're going to invest the federal dollars that are now available?
I lived it, so I'll speak up. $47 million, no more than that, actually. And the preponderance of it went to a technological promise that turned out not to be true. And so we have to be careful. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. And the question is, will it last? A lot of the importance of looking backwards at what happened was to ensure that we keep what the deliverable is, that we agree on what the deliverable is, and that we keep the deliverable front and center with all of these expenditures and all of these initiatives. And so until we really all are directed to the same objective, it will be hard, but that's the goal, and that's the lesson.
Mm-hmm. Holly, I'm assuming you're referring to the 5G technology, or
no? There was
3G was back then.
There was two things going on. There was a deployment of fiber that went to public facilities, libraries, schools, and so on, that did not necessarily stimulate the expansion of that fiber into communities that was hoped. It would, seed fund expansion into communities, and that did not, in fact, happen. And then the other is a wireless technology that purported to bring cell service everywhere, and it actually did not do that. It did increase connectivity in certain areas, but I think the value for the dollar spent was not realized. I don't think many people disagree about that. So that's it. 5G is just a kind of technology that basically cell phone carriers are building out mostly in populated areas. And that's one thing that Vermont has to be realistic about. we don't, no matter what we do, large commercial companies who have mandates to deploy new technology, we are not going to tell them how and when and why to do things. We have to gather up the resources we have and make sure that we do a good job to get what we can, but we shouldn't just say, well, everybody's going to get 5G and hold our breath.
Andrew, at the Council on Rural Development, we built a broadband committee in the year 2000 with members of our congressional delegation, leaders in the electric industry and state government, to plot out the goal of universal service. And in 2002, Jim Douglas, then a candidate for governor, adopted the first universal broadband goal for Vermont. And a lot of people have done a lot of work towards that end since. We've come a long way. The gaps that we have today they're substantial, but they're not infinite. We've come from half of the state being covered, and originally the state being covered, as Michael describes, with telephone linkages, to where we have fiber to a lot of homes, and we've got some pretty good systems advancement and pipe in the ground that can be lit up to go much further. So we have opportunity, and it's a question of closing the loop. So I think that not everything was perfect 10 years ago, but I think we're wiser. I think that there's better local organization. I think legislators and administrators have learned, and I think we're teed up in the current instance to bring it home, to close the loop and complete the fiber. I think a lot of the uses are going to change dramatically over time, that we're in a long-term evolution with technology. And that worries me some, but I think we have to continually seize the leadership over the technology to be effective in managing and moving forward as a community.
As an employer with a couple dozen people across the state working from home right now, my dream scenario is all my employees having fiber to the premises that's locally controlled. And there's a couple of places where that's true right now, and other places with plans. And everybody else is, it's either a poor situation or a risky situation, it feels like.
Wow. Well, what an interesting and fascinating topic, and I'm sure one we'll be talking about for a while longer as the legislature figures out how to divvy up that federal money that's coming our way. But I guess we're just about out of time. We're gonna have to leave it there for today. I just wanted to say before we go, next week our program will be about proposition number 2. Vermonters must oppose racism, renew and expand our collective identity, and welcome new Vermonters. And our guests then will include Jen Kimmich, the co-founder and CEO of the Alchemist Brewery. And if you haven't heard of them, you should. A great Vermont asset there. And Shoshana Davis, the state of Vermont's executive director on racial equity. I wanted to thank all of our guests today for being with us and having such an interesting conversation. Paul Costello, the Executive Director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, Holly Groshner of the Central Vermont Broadband Project, and Michael Wood Lewis, the founder and CEO of Front Porch Forum. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us and share your thinking on this, and hope you'll be back to join us next week. You can watch the programs across the Vermont Access Network stations or on their stations' websites. So hope you found the show thought-provoking and interesting, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great day, everyone.